Greetings, dear viewers. Today, we continue talking about psychology and psychiatry and discussing those basic concepts that are interesting both for specialists and for every person. We will talk about self-development and self-knowledge solely in the vein given in the books by Anastasia Novych and the videos with the participation of Igor Mikhailovich Danilov. Greetings, Diana.
Greetings.
I am very glad to see you. As you understand, a number of questions have accumulated for you as a specialist. Today, I'd like to continue our conversation. After all, a lot of material has already been gathered. We have played quite a lot of games, and now in society, a great number of questions are being voiced, which people are interested in, right? And we have already mentioned that sciences, psychology, and psychiatry, as they are now, hardly cope with these tasks. So, tell us, please, is there such a topic today that you can talk about with joy? What can you as a specialist talk about openly, as they say, with your soul?
With pleasure.
Yes, right, with joy and pleasure.
Sasha, yes, thanks. In fact, this is the question that kept bothering me when I participated in the program series Game of Professionals, What is Consciousness? The topics raised were actually very relevant, but all the topics were quite difficult. That's what we all came to as society. That is, no matter what topic you touch on, and the flow is huge, it was really very difficult. And every time I ask myself this question, is there a topic in psychology and psychiatry that I would like to talk about with joy and with pleasure? There is such a topic. Such a topic exists. And this is the topic of prevention. As a matter of fact, prevention is more valuable and important than any treatment. And it's interesting, it's joyful to learn to understand what can help a person stay healthy and how to maintain health, especially mental health.
Indeed, it would be desirable to understand and hear more about what prevention of mental illnesses means.
In general, nowadays, in any field of healthcare, the very concept of health is associated more with denial of the presence of any disease at all. If there is no disease, then the person is generally healthy. This is how it partially moved to the concept of mental health as well. Generally speaking, the term mental health was introduced by the World Health Organization in 1979, and particularly in the United States of America and the United Kingdom, the word combination mental health means successful performance of mental functions resulting from productive activities, establishing relationships with others, and the ability to adapt to changes and cope with adversities. In psychoanalysis, there is no concept of health at all. Any person is a carrier of pathos, a potential disease that can grow into a state of disease, nosos, when protective mechanisms of psyche fail. We remember that from the standpoint of psychoanalysis, everything that surrounds a person is hostile to him, so a person has to protect himself. Therefore, there is no notion of health at all. And if we open the psychological dictionary, the term mental health is understood as a state of mental well-being. It's an interesting point. Misunderstanding begins when the notion of soul is denied. The characteristic absence of painful mental manifestations, providing regulation of behavior and activity which are adequate to the conditions of reality. This is such a state of an individual which is characterized by the integrity and consistency of all mental functions of the body, providing a sense of subjective mental comfort, an ability to purposeful and meaningful activity, and adequate forms of behavior.
After the third word, I have totally lost the point.
I have actually read it out loud because I was never able to tell it like that. And the most important thing is that for quite a long time I was unable to translate it to any person into some understandable and acceptable language so that it would be clear. I couldn't do this because I didn't have this understanding inside myself. What is mental health? If you look at what people come with, often when they come in, they say, "I don't feel happy anymore. I no longer feel happiness." Or I stopped being joyful, but I'd really like to return to it. But even more often, especially recently, people just say, I no longer dream of joy, happiness, or love. I wish I could at least learn to be calm. Just stop reacting to everything that surrounds me, because otherwise I might go crazy. And in fact, if you listen to all this and to yourself, to your own experience, people actually name the key points. We can say that a mentally healthy person is calm, happy, and able to rejoice. And behind these separate notions and understandings, which I have just named, a very deep meaning is actually revealed. Let's just recall and imagine when we're worried about something or irritated, when we have an uncomfortable inner state, and there are many different people around, and among them there is a person in a calm state, we will surely want to be near him, right? And after a while, we calm down ourselves. So it's a very important state. It's like a crystal among all people, which everybody is attracted to. It's like a sunbeam. And let's just recall a well-known phrase. First calm down and then make a decision. Why? Because this state is actually the most effective in any situation. A person manifests himself most effectively from this very state. For example, if it is necessary to make a decision in order to understand the situation critically and adequately deal with it. And this is very easy to explain. When a person is dominated by some emotions, even his brain functions in a special way. We have the so-called limbic system, where all the centers of emotions are located. When it is active, it practically blocks the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for critical attitude, comprehension, decision-making, and so on. That is, it blocks all the adequacy of human perception. Therefore, a calm state is the most resourceful and most effective state in any situation. Now, let's proceed to the understanding of who a happy person is. A happy person is satisfied and joyful. He's filled with this positive, calm energy. He communicates with people in such a supportive, inspiring way. He sees a resource in everything. He finds a solution in everything. That's the state of happiness. I'm talking about a state of real, calm, deep happiness. People who are under the control of their consciousness are simply unable to come to these states. Why not? We have already said many times that consciousness works in the mode of 60 thoughts per second. What kind of tranquility can we talk about? It's impossible. Such notions as real happiness and joy, the ones I have just talked about, are absent in these programs. Let's say they're present, but in such a distorted version. There is always some condition for this happiness and joy. If something happens, then maybe you'll be a little happy for a while. And again, the condition for this happiness and joy is determined by that very consciousness. Moreover, most often it determines such conditions which make it difficult to achieve and difficult to accomplish. Well, that's how Satan plays.
Yes, I understand what you are talking about. All these conditions temporarily or supposedly give a person a sensation or an emotion of joy, euphoria, or happiness. Besides the fact that they are all conditional, they are also tied to some external factors. You have received something, achieved something, acquired something, you have met someone, and so on. I mean, it's all endless. And here, as you correctly notice, this is the main function of consciousness. It separates a person from his inner source and diverts him to something external.
Yes.
In other words, it makes a person search in the external world for the true happiness that every person carries inside himself. Thus, having detached a human from God, consciousness starts to push him to absolutely different doors, to open them, to spend time on that, to waste his life, but behind them there is eventually emptiness.
Right. And here's a simple example in order to make it clear to everyone. If we look, people tend to change relationships between themselves. What does consciousness focus them on? On the external, to change the form of behavior, to change something else, to talk in another way. For instance, I already take out the garbage, wash the dishes, and put my slippers in the right place, but everyone is dissatisfied anyway. I've already done a lot of work. I don't even show my annoyance. That's what people often say. I don't even express indignation. I hold back. But nothing really changes. And even this inner tension in a person, which torments him, doesn't disappear. Because when a person is oriented on this form without essence, the expectation from consciousness remains. I've done so much, but everything will change only when the other person changes. And only the way his consciousness tells him. When this condition is fulfilled, everything will definitely be fine. But the other person has the exact same consciousness, and it offers him exactly the same, that everything will be fine when everyone around you changes, but not you. Although consciousness always offers two extremes. Either everyone around is 100% to blame, or you're 100% guilty. But both of these extremes lead to a separation of a person. They all lead to a conflict. A person begins to perceive other people as hostile, with accusation and pretension, and it is always the same. That's how consciousness incites a person. It's impossible to change the situation without understanding the essence, without inner changes, without a person starting to feel like the one who is capable of being sincere, honest, and loving. The most important thing is that relationships begin to change when they become humane, when this humane and genuine is a part of relationships. While this is possible only between two personalities, not between two consciousnesses, because the ability to feel is a quality of personality and the spiritual world. And it is manifested. It can actually be manifested only in personality, only when a constant connection with the soul is preserved, maintained, and strengthened. That's when real change is possible. That's when everything changes. As a matter of fact, consciousness always leads to separation, even between very close and dear people, those who are considered to be close relatives, between a mother and a child, a husband and a wife, a brother and a sister. There is such a thing as blood feud. So those people who by definition of that very consciousness are considered to be close relatives are very often involved in a long-term family feud. Because for consciousness, there are no such values as the value of relationships or any human values at all. There is nothing good and kind there. It has one goal. The more painful, the better. The stronger your emotions are, the more energy it will gain. That's it. So when people say, I know now intellectuals might object, no, all decisions must be made and the best decisions are the ones taken in your mind through the prism of your intellect and rationality. Well, in such a case, I have a question for those people who think this way. If we make decisions based on intellect only, then to what kind of society have we come today? To the dishonest society, where everyone is indifferent to others, where everyone focuses solely on their own needs, on sordid needs, in fact. It's a deceitful, indifferent, and cruel society. That's what people's decision leads to, if they're guided by intellect only. In no case do I mean that intellect shouldn't be developed or used. No, of course not. It's necessary to develop and use it, but this intellect should be used by personality. Spiritually developed personality. That's when intellect will serve people, and it will be used with good and worthy intentions. Therefore, intellect must be controlled. It must be used, but only by a spiritually developed personality. Intellect must serve the spiritual world. What does this mean? Everything must serve love. Love instead of selfishness.
Yes, this is an excellent point. I believe that exactly for those who are interested and even for those whose consciousness resents this information, there is a book and video, Consciousness and Personality, from the inevitably dead to the eternally alive. Everyone can study and understand for themselves what intellect or intelligence actually is. they can learn its function for themselves and will be able to understand the essence of the words that you've just said.
When I communicate, especially lately, with people who live under the control of consciousness, it looks like they're locked in a cage. A person is blind and deaf, and he beats himself against the walls of this cage, tries to get out of it, and cannot find a way out, cannot find the door. But there is a door in this cage, and you can unlock it if you have a key. So Allatra is the key that unlocks any door of any cage. And you know, a very important understanding has come, one of such significant insights, which came thanks to the knowledge, was that the soul is the door to the spiritual world, the door to God's world, and this door is always open, while we close it with our selfishness, pridefulness, jealousy, with everything that consciousness offers. Nowadays, there is a huge number of textbooks, scientific articles, researches, studies, and numerous psychotherapeutic theories that try to explain why a person comes to suffering, how it goes wrong and where, and how to get out of it. Yet things haven't got forward an inch. Nothing works. People keep suffering just as they suffered before. Everyone still has plenty of problems, just like before, and nothing changes. But there is one very simple word, which is very scientific and directly explains the cause of all these sufferings and problems. And the word is soulless. It's a person who has lost contact with his soul. When a person loses connection with the soul, then all problems arise, because it is as if he loses protection and opens himself to this aggressive influence of consciousness and the system which is behind it. And the synonym for this word is inhuman. It turns out that when a person loses contact with the soul, he immediately ceases to be a real human being.
Since ancient times, it has been known that there is a soul which is located approximately in the middle of this pyramidal energy structure of a human. Then there is a layer of consciousness. Then above consciousness, which is much higher than one's head, there is personality. So it turns out that personality is beyond the body, or we are as if beyond the body. We are above the head. Moreover, it doesn't matter, I answer straight away, because people will start asking a question. If I am standing upside down or lying on my side, well, these are standard thoughts which are being thrown in. The position of your body doesn't matter. The structure maintains its shape. So, the soul is connected with personality precisely via this silver thread. When a person invests the power of his attention in the spiritual world, while the spiritual world for a person is exactly his soul, he has no other gate through which he can enter there. So the more a person invests, the closer the personality becomes, as it turns out. And some will say, so does it pass through consciousness? Yes, guys, it does. However, consciousness remains as an outer shell, but a non-dividing one. This is already like a fact. Therefore, the dog barks less, but it still barks. You still hear it. And when this process of convergence is going on, then naturally. Yet what is a silver thread? It's a kind of, let's say, let's call it a little tube through which light is coming from the soul. Well, it's just for the sake of understanding, guys. It's just an association for understanding, from the soul to personality. Again, where is personality reflected in the material world? In this top, as if in a mirror, and such a part gets formed, which is connected again with brain neurons, with primary consciousness and secondary consciousness. Well, again, through the primary one. And here, it turns out the closer personality is to the soul, the more the tube is expanding, and light becomes what? There becomes more of it.
More.
Let's imagine a thin, so to say, tube that we connect to a tap. We open the tap, and water is flowing through this thin tube. The thicker we make the tube, the greater volume of water passes. The greater volume, let's say, of his attention a person directs through that very silver thread to the soul, the more he receives. Hence this originated from ancient times, the more love you give to God, the more you receive in return. That's how this originated. You give God a tithe and you receive 100-fold, right? And it turns out that it's necessary to sacrifice one's animal, meaning the animal part or component of a human, for God. That's the best sacrifice. And let's say it is necessary to invest one's attention precisely in spiritual development, and then this will be returned 100-fold.
We again return to the two major questions that a human being has. Who am I? And what is the purpose of my life? Nothing will work out until a person finds the answers to these questions, because these are indeed the key questions in the life of every human. Based on the primordial understanding of who a human is, the human is a spiritual being. There is such a message in healthcare that it is very important to strengthen human health. Well, if I'm a spirit, then which health do I need to strengthen in the first place? Certainly I need to strengthen spiritual health and make my spirit strong. How does this happen? It happens if 90% of my attention is constantly directed towards the soul. That's how personality is developing and how spirit is getting strong. By the way, I have an interesting personal observation about this. I came to the point when 90% of my time was spent on working on myself. I was already so happy about that. I had already managed to organize my life in such a way that it was pretty much filled with what I thought was the most important for me. Most of my time was spent on consulting patients and communicating with people who came to me for help. Meanwhile, we have already mentioned that the proper work of a doctor means continuous work on oneself. Only then a doctor can help people. Most of my time I spent listening to the videos, reading the books by Anastasia Novych, and rethinking scientific information in the light of the knowledge received. So I thought everything is organized and it should be going at a completely different pace. Yet I realized that something was wrong. I was missing something. I wasn't working enough. There was a trick somewhere. And just look, I arranged things the way that 90% of my time was dedicated to what was important for me. But personality actually develops when 90% of attention is directed towards the soul. This is the key point. When I constantly direct my attention towards the soul, I always feel this connection. I strengthen it. Attention is such a great power, and I direct it towards what's most important. This point was crucial for my understanding. That's how consciousness once again shifted everything to the external. So you have filled your life with the right information, and this seems to be enough. But the key point is where a person's attention is directed. This is very important.
Thank you for the example, because many of our viewers watched the video when Igor Mikhailovich was asked this particular question about the distribution of attention and time. And now you have clearly explained this.
Look, this seems to be good news, and everything is simple and clear. I'm the one who is able to make the choice, the real choice. It's the prerogative of personality only. This is its right. I'm the one who is bestowed with the greatest power, the power of love. As a matter of fact, each of us, every person, is looking for this love all life long, striving to get it, demanding and expecting it from everyone. However, we fail. It doesn't work out this way, right? In fact, everything is much better. The source of this power is inside each of us. Yet a surprising thing happens next. Many people who find this out don't strive for this source for some reason. It's not even possible to say that they're happy right away. It's as if they forget about it and don't strive to go deeper into it. Yes, such a paradox.
Yes, this sounds trivial. Is it really so simple?
Is it really so simple? Astonishment, some explanations, some excuses. There are actually a lot of such paradoxes. And they're obvious, but for some reason we don't think about them. And here's the question: who within us resists freedom and love? Consciousness. Certainly consciousness. When you start communicating with people, I remember my own experience. When you say that we have a soul, this is more or less accepted by most people. Let's say calmly accepted. People agree with this quite easily and start thinking about it. When you begin to say that the real self is a spirit, I remember my own experience of perceiving this very well. For me, for example, it was very inspiring because it was associated with the concept of true freedom and independence. Finally, it became clear who in me is created in the image and likeness. For me, it was like an incentive to learn something new that I didn't know about myself yet. That's on the one hand. But on the other hand, there was confusion and resistance. I'm a body. This is understandable, it's familiar, and it's usual. But I'm a spirit. What does this mean? How is it? How to understand it? How can this be recognized and felt? You have to learn to feel what I'm a spirit means. And this can be felt. Yet in order for this to become as clear, natural, and familiar, it's necessary to take the first steps, to separate yourself from your consciousness, to understand how consciousness works, and to realize that thoughts are not us, they come to us. These are the first steps, to study, to observe thoughts, and when you come to this, the greatest resistance begins. The greatest resistance in most people is caused precisely by the fact that thoughts are not ours. Thoughts come to us, they're aggressive towards ourselves and other people. And the hardest thing to accept is that all people have the same thoughts. Does everyone, including me, all have the same thoughts? And perhaps the last point that rouses people's indignation is that someone else controls this process, not them. And it's not just someone who controls, but it's the devil. And there's another paradox. In our society, there's an enormous number of all kinds of satanic sects and cults. This is so widespread nowadays at every turn, and it doesn't cause any resistance. But when you voice that behind this whole process there is a whole system of consciousness, the system which is controlled by the devil, this causes resistance. So many paradoxes. You know, it is so important to figure out what the devil is and how it manifests himself. Only then it's possible to understand what to do with it and how to avoid it. So it turns out that on the one hand, a person kind of proudly states, I make my own decisions. No one controls me. This causes resistance. On the other hand, we can observe that the person constantly shifts responsibility and doesn't want to be responsible for his own actions. We have already mentioned that either someone else is 100% to blame or it's all my fault, which is the flip side of arrogance. And this basically happens in all areas of human life. In the family and at work. Who is the first to blame that something is wrong in our country? Officials and the government. Yet officials and the government are just people like us. They have absolutely the same consciousness. They have absolutely the same emotions, rejection, anger, irritation. They also have conflicts. Their consciousness convinces them, just like the consciousness of each of us, that they are the most important people and everything should be centered, first and foremost, upon them. It means that their consciousness is as egocentric as ours and forces them to think primarily of their own needs rather than care about others. Everything happens like with every one of us. These people suffer from the same mental disorders as everyone else. They take the same medications against the same mental states as everyone else, and they make decisions that we don't agree with.
It is indeed one of the main and powerful paradoxes for consciousness of any person, because it likes to shift responsibility. Yet, as you have said, it is really important to understand how consciousness works in oneself, to understand its manifestations and mechanisms. And let's say, when you have already studied your real enemy inside yourself, then you know how it acts in other people too. After all, it was said more than once in videos with Igor Mikhailovich Danilov that there is no exclusivity. It was also voiced so many times in different projects on Allatra TV. However, consciousness still convinces, no, you are not like that. You are unique. Your thoughts are brilliant, and all sorts of such things. And how many people are like that? Billions of people hear that. And shifting responsibility, this obsequiousness and this admiration originate from here. First, consciousness enslaves a person, and then it makes him bow down before others. It was also mentioned that the hierarchy from the demonic world is now brought into our world, and people live by these rules.
Consciousness really doesn't have a responsibility function. It just doesn't. Consciousness has a function of shifting responsibility. That's why it happens this way, because responsibility is a quality of personality. If we don't return to the true understanding of personality, again and again we come back to this concept. Responsibility is a quality of the spiritual world. It's a quality of personality. I just cannot stop being amazed with what great wisdom and love we have been created, with incredible wisdom and love. Just look, we're always trying to change someone. People spend their whole life on this, and it takes so much effort, but there is no result. I don't know a single person, starting with myself, who would manage to change another person, especially the way I want, the way consciousness dictates. This just doesn't work. It takes a lot of time and effort, but it doesn't work. Because as a matter of fact, at this moment, we go against God. We can say that we go against the laws of the universe, because none of us has the right to influence the choice of another person. We have no right to do that. It's a sacred right which is given by God to every person, the right to choose, to decide what he considers the most important, acceptable, and so on. And just look, what do wisdom and love mean? We can only change ourselves. For instance, I can only change myself. I'm always here. I'm always available for myself. And I don't need to run after anyone. Go ahead and change yourself the way you want, as much as you like. And the question arises, how to change? Exactly the way it is written in the books by Anastasia Novych and as Igor Mikhailovich Danilov tells in the videos.
In order not to experience evil, not to experience suffering and pain, what should one do? One should reject bad thoughts. When a person realizes that he wants to be happy, and my friend does want to experience joy, he needs the simplest technique and the simplest tool is to reject, say, oppressive thoughts. For instance, a thought comes into your head that you're suffering, you're poor, but you say, no, I'm happy, I love God. Just like that, even in a form of a game, just to start playing. Forbid your consciousness to judge anyone, to hate, to be angry with anyone. Just forbid it. Say, no, I won't do it. Consciousness says, this is a bad person, but you say, why is he bad? What makes him worse than me? Just to answer like this, to counter, to force a part of consciousness, you should understand one thing. Well, my dear friend, remember one thing. You are financing your thoughts. It's really so. You don't order thoughts in your head. They come from outside. Do you have doubts? Just sit and think. Let's think about a butterfly. Yes, you can see a butterfly, you can imagine it in your head right now. Try to keep this butterfly in your head for 5 minutes and you will realize that you won't be able to keep it. Fish will come into your head, monkeys, lemons, oranges, a lame neighbor, well, whoever you want. And this butterfly will be mixed with them. But you just try to keep the butterfly. You won't succeed. Why? Because you are not the master of consciousness. And when you realize that you are not the master of consciousness, but precisely with your attention you are financing that, which you are investing and paying your attention to this, right? Meaning, what is in your head, that you are kind of financing. And precisely this financing, meaning energy spending, bring these or those thoughts to life. Later on, they can influence you, influence your life, and the life of people who surround you. Why? Because having accepted a thought that this person is bad, You start treating him as a bad person. You reject him. And what makes him worse than you? Here's a simple question. But when this thought comes and you say, no, hold on, I don't need this thought. I won't judge this person. Just as simple as that. And you have refused and think about what is good. Consciousness is trying again to force some bad thought, evil, fear or hatred on you. It is trying to belittle or elevate you, whereas you just say, no, I want about love, about joy, however, not in understanding of person-to-person love, but about love in the highest understanding. Just be happy. And this joy, it is little, tiny, and quick passing because consciousness is trying to erase it. But if you have experienced it once, you can always increase it once again. And every time, every day, you will increase and intensify your every experience. And finally, you'll realize that you dictate to consciousness. And only those thoughts come which you want, because you reject others. You start feeling that there is love. You start feeling that there is joy, and life becomes more beautiful. Even if you feel pain in your body, you're ill, you have health problems at this moment, but these are the problems with your temporary body. While we are speaking about eternity, this is the first step to understand that you are a personality. This is the first step to an angel, and let's say the first step in opposition to the beast. And it can give you an opportunity to gain freedom, real freedom, freedom from Satan, freedom from the beast. It is the most simple, not to hold a grudge.
Everything that we have talked about is really very important and useful information, both for professionals and, I repeat one more time, for those who need to answer the main questions for themselves. Who am I? What is the purpose of my life? Why am I here? What is soul? What is personality? So you and I began today's dialogue with a statement that prevention is something that we can talk about with joy.
What is prevention of mental disorders? It is solely such a very conscientious, diligent work on ourselves with an understanding of our true nature and who we really are. It is such a conscientious work on studying consciousness, separating from it, and refusing to obey these destructive programs. And what must be done at the same time, as sort of a simultaneous process, is development of this perception through feelings. Learning to live like a human being means to learn to feel. It's accumulation of this inner power, the power of love. And this is the only way to prevent mental disorders. There is no other way.
Again, I will have the next question, because nowadays people are very often deluded by the dictation of consciousness. What does it mean to work on oneself? After all, people actively begin to do something ostensibly with themselves. Someone is engaged in some ordinary physical exercises. What is that? It is body development, meaning a person spends time, attention, and resources to achieve some results in sports or fitness. As a result, he gets either a beautiful body or a sick body that needs treatment anyway. Other people sincerely believe that they work on themselves by attending some training courses. As mentioned in the videos Paranormal Phenomena in a Human Being and The Shield, these are all kinds of retreats and training courses, meaning everything that, on the contrary, enhances and strengthens consciousness. But where is personal work? Where is work on oneself, on one's spiritual nature? That's what people forget about. People just forget about it and follow the wrong way. The lack of a knowledge base, the absence of relevant notions, and the presence of distorted concepts that exist nowadays lead people in a completely different direction, and people sincerely believe that they are developing and improving themselves. Outwardly, perhaps, but if everyone asks themselves honestly and answers those questions which are in the books by Anastasia Novak, which are voiced in the videos, and which we have voiced today, they will understand what kind of work they do and whose piggy bank they replenish.
People confuse simple things, don't they? It is one of the most difficult moments of acceptance for every person. I remember how it was with me. It took me probably more than a year after I had found the knowledge to start keeping a diary, making regular notes, and writing down thoughts. There were plenty of excuses. There were a lot of reasons from consciousness not to do this. And when I work with people, I've already said that this is what I come across. The most difficult thing for everyone, although it seems to be such a simple thing, is just to sit down and write down their thoughts. Although it's not dangerous, it takes only 10 minutes a day, at least 10 minutes a day, just to gain this experience. The resistance is incredible. Meanwhile, 30 years ago, a professor from the University of Texas, with his colleagues, discovered that if you write down your worries and memories in a certain way, it improves your health, and not only mental health, but also psychological and physical one. What was this method about? What did they come up with? Being in some emotional state. For example, in relation to some situation, a person sits down and writes out his thoughts without censorship, just the way they're coming to him at that moment. It's not even necessary to write correctly. No punctuation marks are needed. It's important to record this coming stream of thoughts honestly. It takes no more than 10 to 15 minutes. That's all. A person writes this out, then takes a short break, also about 10 or 15 minutes, and then he rereads this record and writes a second note. And here, he already writes down what he has noticed in the stream of recorded thoughts, what has been unexpected or new for him. Maybe something that he hasn't known about himself at all, what insights it has prompted him to have. And look, there's a very interesting point here. After he has made the first notes in this emotional state, he takes a little break. Why? Because now, when he sits down to write the second note, he writes it being detached. He's no longer in the stream of thoughts. The first note has freed him from emotional involvement in the situation. He's already detached from these worries. And now he's already able to look at it quite differently, from a calmer state. These are such kinds of observations. Yet further conclusions they came up with were also very interesting. At that time, this method caught the interest of many therapeutic clinics, and it was applied to different patients with different diagnoses, and they got the following results. For instance, it was found that in asthmatic patients, 15 minutes of writing about something significant reduces the frequency and intensity of attacks. In patients who have rheumatoid arthritis, it decreases the severity of pain syndrome. In cancer patients, it decreases the number of night awakenings. One of recent studies has ascertained that post-operative wounds in elderly people heal more quickly if this type of writing is used as a complementary therapeutic method. Thus, uncontrollable emotions lead to diseases. And what are uncontrollable emotions? It's the uncontrolled work of consciousness and the consequence of uncontrollable thoughts. It turns out that the only prevention of mental diseases today is understanding the need to study our true nature, to study what consciousness is.
Now it has become clear what you are talking about. We can call it the first steps when a person really starts working on himself and studying himself. I remember these stumbling blocks, one of which is when consciousness prevents you from keeping a diary. After all, it has been said so many times how important and effective this tool is. Yet no. I mean, so much time was dedicated to practices, reading the books, and yet you still understand that you get stuck somewhere and lose it. Until I began to keep a diary, until I began to differentiate myself from consciousness, until I began to study consciousness. This was the most important thing. I can honestly say that all this work was kind of inefficient. Consciousness wants to say it was useless. Why? Because I can tell you for sure that you get stuck at the phase of struggling with yourself. Meaning, you do feel. You feel your soul. You feel God. You follow your feelings. But at some point, you get distracted and redirected, and you don't understand why. And what happens next? Accusation. Something is wrong again, and you do it wrongly, and you don't know how to do it right. This is exactly the phase of struggling which Igor Mikhailovich was talking about. And Tatiana gave examples more than once in the videos on how a lot of people go through it. After all, consciousness immediately pulls up such categories as struggle with yourself. Of course, until you separate yourself from consciousness, until you write down these thoughts which come to you, until you agree that they are alien, you think it is you. You think that all this dirt and hatred are yours, but they are not yours. So at the point when you understand that you don't need to struggle, and when it comes, you perceive it as spam, and it simply passes by, then your attention is directed towards life.
Igor Mikhailovich, could you somehow reveal this issue? What is the right way to write down one's own thoughts? Should one analyze them? What?
No, the analysis includes precisely, so there's a simple mechanism. When a thought comes to a person, to do something negative, something bright, but the person already realizes, when he is controlling his thoughts, he realizes that they are not his. He understands that they come to him. After all, he hasn't ordered a thought. For example, so that you say, take an offense at her. Well, for example, she has looked upon you not in the right way. Such a common trite phrase, right? You understand that it oppresses you, so you write it down. That today is the date, the time, and every day you've marked there. This thought came at 11:15. And that's it. And this thought will disappear as soon as you write it down. If you start to analyze why you have got such a thought, you activate the work of consciousness and run into a lie. And this chihuahua starts deceiving you right away and playing with you like with a puppet.
Something is wrong with you.
Surely.
It also sounds like a direct command.
Or something is wrong with her, right? But you are accurately writing down the thoughts which you haven't ordered. They don't come to you. You are busy with, for example, some computational processes. You add or deduct something. And here a thought comes to you that someone is wrong about you. I'm sorry, what is your consciousness occupied with? It squares some root out of nobody knows what. And suddenly a thought comes to you that someone treated you wrong. Why do you need it now? Why does your consciousness start manipulating you and making you worry about something instead of doing this math? Is it a freedom of thought? No, it's not. That's precisely what should be written down, you see? Because such a thought has come. Why has it come precisely at this moment? Because you have loosened this leash instead of making your consciousness work and keeping it on a tight leash. You see? And it's precisely in this moment, when you loosened it, that you were distracted by something and pay more attention not to, say, inner spiritual processes, but to the material. And your consciousness gained a certain degree of freedom, and it immediately started deluging you with rubbish. That's a simple example. It's like when, so to say, an antivirus is installed on a computer. As soon as it has become weaker, they immediately start deluging the computer with rubbish, right?
You know, in this regard, I've just thought about such a notion as will. It's a very important notion. There's simply total confusion. In one of the videos with Igor Mikhailovich, we already touched upon what will is and what character is. Indeed, these are quite confusing notions. Specifically, in psychology, will is considered to be an autonomous psychic process, a unique ability of personality to arbitrarily control its behavior. There's one more definition. Will is a person's ability to make decisions based on the thinking process and direct his thoughts and actions in accordance with the decision that has been made. In other words, an illusion is created that a person controls his thinking process. Yet what about that which happens every day to each of us and in general to any person? I'm sitting and doing some work. I need to focus on something. Meanwhile, thoughts and memories come regarding how to figure things out with someone, how someone replied to me the wrong way, how someone messed up. I'm getting involved in the process, and sometimes I'm unable to switch my attention to work for several days. It's not just that I cannot switch my attention. I'm already full of emotions, and I'm no longer up to working or up to doing my assignment. I no longer care about my boss or anyone else. How to deal with this? I don't even mention that all mental states, all mental disorders begin with the fact that a person is obsessed with certain thoughts that he calls his own and cannot divert his attention in any way. So is this a control of thinking processes? If people could really control their thinking processes, then today not a single psychologist, psychiatrist, or psychotherapist would have patients. I can say this for sure. So it turns out that it's interesting that from the perspective of science, will is an integral part of intellect. It turns out that we have been led to the fact that we can only conduct the will of the animal mind, because intellect is a part of consciousness. Hence, we conduct only the will of consciousness. In other words, through science, a human being has been led to the fact that he conducts only the will of consciousness, the will of the system, the will of the animal mind. Why do I say conducts? Because when I got acquainted with the knowledge, that's when everything fell into place. Everything became very simple and clear. A human being has no will. Personality is a conductor of will. It can be a conductor of the will either of the spiritual world or of the system of consciousness and the one who is behind it. And a person makes this choice every moment. This choice is the most important thing. What does this concept give? Why has it become a very important understanding for me, for example, and what does it provide? It frees you from envy, from this disgusting black feeling that drains every person, because it has become clear that there is nothing to envy. Why? Everything good in me is when I really manifest myself as a kind person. Everything humane, sincere, and honest is a manifestation of God in me. And the same applies to any person. When we open ourselves up, when we conduct the will of the spiritual world, then every person is beautiful. And the purpose and the point is to learn to live this way, because we're beautiful when we conduct exactly this will. Each of us has consciousness. There's definitely nothing to envy here. And it humbles any person equally. What is there to envy? There is nothing to envy. And just imagine that only proper understanding that a human being is a conductor of will gives us liberation from this terrible, exhausting state. So, as a matter of fact, working on ourselves is the most interesting thing that can happen to us here in this three-dimensional space. It's the most important thing, and it's the only thing that makes our existence meaningful. And the paradox is that people refuse and resist this very thing, and we go to it with such reluctance. Again, it seems to be the easiest, the most significant, and the most important. Who resists in us? And of such little choices, instantaneous in each of us, this choice happens every second, every moment. What am I opening up to? And it's responsibility. I'm responsible for what I bring into this world, for what I fill myself with. These are the small choices that bring me to either life or death. I would like to read an excerpt from the book Allatra, which defines very precisely what spiritual life is. Life is a sequence of events where every moment is a link in a chain, like a film frame of the footage that captures all the thoughts and deeds of a person. Sometimes you watch a good movie and get positive impressions from it, as most of the frames in it are bright and vibrant, whereas sometimes you watch another movie and it creates a depressing mood, because most of its frames are dark and gloomy. So it is important that your life movie is full of light and brightness, and that it has as many good film frames as possible, while every frame is a moment here and now. The quality of every frame of your life movie depends solely on you, because you make your life either bright or dark with your thoughts and deeds. A moment you have lived cannot be erased or cut out, and there will be no second take. Spiritual life is precisely saturation of every frame with kindness, love, good thoughts, and deeds. The main point is to clearly orient your life towards the spiritual nature, to perform spiritual practices, to expand your horizons of knowledge, not to yield to provocations of the animal nature, but to create in yourself a feeling of true love for God, and of course to do good deeds more often and to live by conscience. This is daily work and a gradual victory over yourself. All of this makes up your path which no one will walk for you, and no one will do the spiritual work instead of you. Indeed, what is written in the books by Anastasia Novych and what Igor Mikhailovich tells about in all videos, it is exactly about working on oneself, about the difficulties that a person encounters, the tricks of consciousness, how to overcome them, how to learn honesty, how to learn to feel, and how to learn to love. So far, there are 35 videos. The books which, well, I don't know if we're even able to comprehend all the depths they contain. And here's a question. Does the spiritual world take care of a human being? It surely does. And it's really, truly important to do what is written there and what we're being told. We're being told about this work on ourselves, but we're told very gently, very delicately. Nothing is imposed on us. They offer and leave the choice to each of us to do or not to do, to accept or not to accept. And that's our choice. Excuse me, to jump out of bed in the morning and rush off to make money in order to buy things that we will demonstrate to each other later on? Demonstrate what? Our cruelty and our stupidity as dictated by consciousness? Or to wake up early in the morning to have time for spiritual practices, to make a diary entry which simply makes a change in my life, brings me back to life, returns respect for myself, for other people, which brings me back to joy and calmness. Just to wake up and start the day with a simple question to myself: who has awakened now? Who am I? And whose working day will begin now? A working day of personality or a working day of consciousness? A day of the alive, free person, or a day of the system slave? Just try to ask yourselves this question. Try to determine for yourselves how you want to start this day. And all of you will hear thoughts like, "Why do you need this? This is nonsense, crazy, stupid. Are you nuts or what? Come on, hurry up. You're already running late for everything." That's what you're going to hear. We know how to wake up with the thought that we wish this day would pass quickly, with great fatigue due to the list of tasks that pop up on us before we open our eyes in the morning. We know it. It's easy and familiar to us. But try to wake up in the morning, at least one morning, and write down the whole list of tasks which doesn't even let you get out of bed, and you don't want to start all this. Write it down and take a look. Just take a careful look. Is this really what you need? Do you really want to spend the day like this? I would even specify the next question. Ask yourselves a little differently. What if this is the last day of my life? Am I ready to spend it like this? What is very important when the knowledge comes into our life? It must become of paramount importance. My personal medical experience has convinced me that no matter what a person owns and in what amounts, no matter what kind of material possessions are in his life, this doesn't make him happy. In the past, very often, I used to think about what true believers, elders, sages, and saints should know, what they actually knew, that they easily gave up what is considered to be material welfare and were ready to go even to death, to give up their life, so as not to betray, not to renounce what they knew. I was just thinking of how incredibly beautiful this had to be, to such an extent that it's totally incomparable to this entire tinsel of the material world. And do you know how consciousness has always presented it to me? Like a path for the chosen people, that it's not for everyone, on the one hand. On the other hand, it presented it as a great sacrifice. How? To give up everything that surrounds you? And these people were portrayed as martyrs, as sufferers. Yet when the knowledge came, everything became clear, and it turned out that there was no sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice is that? Refusing to obey such a destructive program which literally drives you crazy is not a sacrifice, it is a bliss. And it turns out that they're not sufferers, but the sufferers and martyrs are those who are under the control of this program. Working on ourselves is the main thing. And this is very important to understand. Everything we got accustomed to should become secondary, while this must be the main thing. At this moment, consciousness imposes the greatest fear. Every person lives in it constantly. The fear of changes, any changes. Can you imagine what we're talking about here? The whole habitual lifestyle should become secondary, while the most important, the real, should truly take its place in human life. At this point, an incredible, just enormous fear arises in people, and they immediately close up. No, how is that? And they start using the knowledge and all the most important things as a bow, as a supplement to everything they're accustomed to. No, they don't work. They do work. They must become the main priority and take their rightful place.
Regarding the fear of changes, I can easily say that again. These are the principles of the work of consciousness. After all, when a person lives in certain ways, there is an algorithm of actions. He knows when he gets up, what he eats, where he goes, when he comes, and what he does thereafter. What is all that? It's a field of the activity of consciousness. It knows very well what actions and at what stage a person will perform and where to prepare surprises for him. And when a person begins to change something, even externally, it becomes stressful. Why? Because consciousness has to restructure itself. It has to arrange something new.
Yes, it is stressful for consciousness. I cannot control him anymore. I cannot guide him as I planned, towards what I wanted to.
Right. And this indignation, reluctance to do something unusual compared to its habitual schedule, exactly originates from there. But a person doesn't know about this, does he? So we again go back to the point that
he believes that it's his decision.
He associates himself with the dead, as simple as that.
At our previous meeting, we talked about the fact that psychology and psychiatry as sciences must be responsible for the understanding they give to society. Is a human an animal beast or a spiritual being? We know what choices these sciences have signed up for, and we have come to the point that today there is only one science in society, the true science about the alive, real human being. It is Allatra. Therefore, in the context of what we have just talked about, what you've just said, Allatra should become the main science, the central science in society and in the life of every person, while other sciences should already branch out of it, grow and develop as a consequence, as a supplement to it. Then these sciences will be really creative. They will serve people. They will serve the most important purpose, spiritual development of every person and society as a whole. That's when everything will change. That's when it makes sense and has a meaning. Why do I also say that it should be the main science not only in society, but in the life of every person? You see, there are so many videos and meetings. We talk about the same things. And now we're talking about how difficult it is for a person to switch attention, how difficult it is to refuse. We have accumulated so many of these misconceptions during our life. Whereas if from the very birth, for every child, for every person, the science that he would learn was the main one, he would develop a habit of paying and holding attention properly. He would grow, and it would be natural for him. He wouldn't have to seek where this personality is and how to understand what spirit is, but it would be natural for him since birth. Major development for a person would be spiritual development, which is natural for him. Therefore, it's very important to make the science the main one in society and in the life of every person. Precisely this science.
Because in our childhood we are taught to do the right things, not to do something. Don't do this, it's not good. Don't do that, it's not good. And this you can do, it is good. This is what we are being taught. But we are not being taught what's behind that, which make us act one or another way. Even in childhood, to do what is not good. But what's behind it? It is precisely a thought that stands behind it, which we don't generate, we perceive it. And these thoughts make us act and behave badly towards others, even towards ourselves. They make us commit certain actions that often harm ourselves, and we pay for them ourselves thereafter. This is how our consciousness works. If, in childhood, we were taught to monitor our thoughts, to control them, not to accept what is bad, and if we were told how to do this, then in adult life we wouldn't make mistakes either. We wouldn't strive to search for those who would love us, but we would really love others, would love life, would love God, would love each other, and the world would be totally different. This is banal, this is simple. This is simple indeed. But in order for this simple to become a reality for all people, everyone who understands this, who cares, who really cares, should perform an enormous hard work. Religions have existed for thousands of years. For as many years, wars have existed. For as many years, crimes and wrongdoings have existed. And for as many years, the best people hurt their families and friends very often. Why does this happen? Because, pardon me, we as people are manipulated by those who since ancient times were called demons. Why demons? And what is a demon? And here it would certainly be interesting to look back into antiquity when these expressions initially appeared and what they meant. A demon denotes an integral part of a human being. That is, a demon is the animal part of the human himself. If since childhood people understood that they had an angel and they had a demon and stood on the angel's side, if they were brought up with understanding that the demon would eventually lead them to the grave, it wouldn't give them life, wouldn't give them freedom. They would get rid of it already in childhood. In antiquity there was an interesting expression. If we translate it, let's say, into our modern language, it would sound approximately like this. A free person remains free even in jail, while a slave of his consciousness remains a slave even on the freedom.
Something else I would really like to say, because it's very important. I would like to talk about ALLATRA International Public Movement. When I found out about it, it was very inspiring for me. Because I read the books, the knowledge was available. I understood that it's a lot, It changed my life completely. But then I found out how many people, how alive this knowledge is, how inspiring it is, how strong this impulse is, the impulse to action, to the good action, to the creative and constructive one. In a sense, it even increased the power of this knowledge for me and its importance. And you know, even such a simple understanding has come, that it turns out that everything can be changed in a peaceful way. If you start working on yourself, find this sincerity, honesty in yourself, and work on this, you just come to respect yourself and understand the value of your life. And then you learn to treat absolutely any person with the same sincerity and respect. You also learn to understand that their life is as valuable as your own. That's what the participants of the Allatra movement proceed from. That's the basis for the participants of the Allatra movement, and that's how they learn to change the world around them. It may only be a voluntary action, based on a deep inner need. This spirit within every person comes to life due to the knowledge, due to work on oneself, the real work on oneself. That's where real responsibility awakens, as we have said, as an integral part of personality. And then there comes an understanding of what is really needed and has to be done in this three-dimensional space. So the most important thing we all have to do here is to unite all together and create such conditions that everyone, any person, would be very comfortable and safe here, free and joyful, so that everyone could implement the most important and true meaning of their life. And this meaning is the same for all of us. Thus, when we're united, it's much easier for us to do this, and it works much better. I just want to say that in the movement, there are ordinary people like everyone else who will listen to us. There are people of different ages, genders, religions, social statuses, and nationalities. They're ordinary people with the same problems coming from consciousness that any other person has. Nevertheless, they're getting free from their problems, from the problems that consciousness imposes on each of us, without psychiatrists, psychologists, or psychotherapists. We're not the only ones who are saying this today. Today, from all the podiums, from the highest podiums, in the serious television interviews that are taken from leading professors, from leading scientists, it looks like the statements literally pour from the screens that humankind has gone crazy, that mental disorders dominate in society, that we have now come to the point that there is an epidemic of mental disorders in society. And when these leading experts are asked the question what to do, they say, we don't know. They just put it straight, we don't know. So this is not just some sort of our conclusion, it's the fact of today. We have a society, 7 billion people, who are dominated by mental disorders. And there is a whole layer of people, thousands of people who are protected from these disorders by proper work on themselves. I honestly can't even imagine why this doesn't attract the attention of any researcher or any doctor. Let's just step back and look at the situation from outside. 7 billion people are overwhelmed with insanity. And there's a whole layer of people, thousands of people who have saved themselves from this madness. They're protected. Yes, of course, everyone is at their own stage, everyone has their own difficulties, everyone is walking their own path. It's just like with a disease, you know? Someone recovers faster, someone slower. Everything depends on the person's desire and aspiration to recover, but they do recover. And to be frank, the first participants of the Allatra International Public Movement should have been psychologists, psychiatrists, and psychotherapists, because we must be on the side of the knowledge that frees people from mental disorders. Sorry, colleagues, but this is our direct responsibility. All psychotherapists, all psychologists urge a person to work on himself. They conduct this work with him, and all trainings, seminars, and a lot of other events are held. But there is no effect, no result. Why? Because there is no understanding who is working on himself. And the next point, there is no goal, no understanding of the purpose. What for? There is no goal for which a person is indeed ready to change in the long run. Meanwhile, the participants of Allatra International Public Movement do have such a goal, the real goal. We have mentioned that throughout their lifetime, all people ask themselves the question, what is the meaning of life? And I also asked myself this question more than once. I have already lived through the depth and meaning of this question when I was watching the video Gaming Addiction of the System and heard this question asked by Igor Mikhailovich. I'll voice it now. What is the goal of your life? The goal on which you're ready to spend your life. Every second and every instant of your attention. That's how this question should sound. And it is precisely this goal that allows to make this work on oneself the main thing, and not to stop, not to give it up. Then it's truly work on oneself.
You know, in working on oneself, it's very interesting and important to understand and answer why and what all this is being done for. After all, when people begin to get acquainted with the knowledge, when they start their path, when they accept it in their life, they might get tempted, to shift responsibility. Indeed, very often consciousness draws us into some kind of speculations. Oh, how great it would be if all the specialists in psychology and psychiatry got acquainted with the knowledge. I would then come to them and they would give me a ready answer. Thus, what does consciousness always hunt for? It hunts for some kind of a magic pill, which would at once, without any effort and without any work, resolve all problems for a person. And basically, the same wish it shifts onto spiritual development. Yet, as Igor Mikhailovich said, spiritual work is the responsibility of every person. It is the path which you can surmount only personally. Nobody will do this job for you. And when you've been talking about Allatra International Public Movement, I can also note its uniqueness lies in the fact that its participants really want to help other people. And they don't just want, they help other people. But what is at the heart of this? Painstaking, quality work on themselves. After all, only when we work on ourselves, we can help other people. This is exactly the same as it is said in Islam. There is the greater jihad and the lesser jihad, and they are interconnected. Yet many people yield to the tricks of consciousness. They push the greater jihad aside and start the lesser jihad, as if there is no time for that. There is no time to work on myself, so now I'll go and save those who still don't understand anything. In general, as you and I have already said in the program today.
Yes, everything is as always.
Consciousness is consciousness. And it is easy and simple for you when you know its algorithms, when you know how it works. In conclusion, I'd like to recall such a parable. I don't know whether it's a modern one or not, but it has caught my attention. A little boy was friends with the son. He came up to it and asked, "How are you?" And the son asked during this conversation, "Listen, what are you most afraid of in your life?" The boy said, "I'm afraid of the darkness." The son was very surprised and said, "I've never seen darkness in my life." He said, "Come with me, I'll show you." It said, "Where is it?" "Well, there is one place. I know that it's so completely dark in there that you will be able to see the darkness and understand how terrible it is." The son said, "Let's go." The boy went down into the darkest cellar where not a single light bulb worked and not a single ray of light ever penetrated. But when the son went down there, it asked, "Stop, where is it?" The child was surprised and said, "I don't know. Usually it was here." So the point is that where there is the sun, there can be no darkness. And the knowledge of Allatra is precisely that sun which dispels the darkness and ignorance from consciousness. Guys, if you don't want to be friends with the sun, if you are not ready to let it into the cellars and labyrinths of your consciousness, then at least get out of there. Get out of the darkness, and you will realize how beautiful this is. How wonderful it is to be alive. How wonderful it is to help other people. How wonderful it is to be with God. Thank you very much. Thank you, Diana, for this program and for everything that we have voiced today. See you again. All the best.